Hi there, my name is Cleveland Deleuze. Today, I'll be talking about the short story, The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. Now, I'd like to focus on the topic of the theme throughout my discussion. But before I do that, I'd like to give a quick summary of the story. Now, if you'd want to read the story, it can be found on page 340 in our Charters and Charters book. The story begins with Gregor Samsa waking up and finding himself as a giant bug. Now, Gregor doesn't know why this happened to him. He just sees that it did. This sudden transformation into a giant bug ends up causing a lot of problems within the Samsa family. They lose their primary provider in Gregor the minute he turned into this giant insect. Now, everyone in the family has to start pulling more weight and having more responsibility. And they also have to take care of this giant bug that was formerly Gregor. Throughout the short story, Gregor's conscience stays intact. So his mind is still a human being. However, his physical appearance is that of how he's mostly portrayed as a giant cockroach. The story goes on, and we get a sight of what it's like for the Samsa family having to take care of Gregor while also finding a way to provide themselves with money, food, basic cleaning, which all used to fall under Gregor. This eventually takes a heavy toll on the Samsa family. They start resenting this giant bug more and more each day that it lives with them, until eventually they get really tired of it and attack it. Once they attacked it, Gregor gets hit with a giant apple that is his ultimate demise. Once Gregor ends up dying, his family actually is relieved that they lose one of the biggest responsibilities that they've had ever since Gregor became a bug. This story is actually very interesting. Going on into the topic of the theme, the very first theme I'd like to talk about is what I perceive to be the biggest theme in the book, or in the short story, which is a metamorphosis. It's not just Gregor's physical metamorphosis that transpires in the novel. We also see an evolution in the Samsa household. They lose their provider Gregor and end up having to work more. That means that Gregor's sister Greta Samsa has to postpone what she's doing in school and work. This gets added on to Gregor's mom having to cook more around the house and Gregor's dad having to work again. They find themselves having a lack of money and end up having to board people in their house. And Gregor sees that his presence actually is taking a toll on his own family. And the tables get flipped on Gregor. As opposed to him being the provider, he's now having to be the benefactor of his family. And the family's mood towards Gregor changes. Instead of viewing Gregor as this primary breadwinner, they now have Gregor the giant bug, who's just a giant nuisance in their family. This causes a big change in Greta Samsa, who I think personally undergoes the actual metamorphosis in the book. Greta Samsa starts off as a very shy girl, but as the story progresses and she ends up having to take the responsibilities that were formerly Gregor's, she ends up becoming a blossoming woman. Now, as I try to find a quote, the very last sentence of the book, it basically talks about how much Greta has grown in the eyes of her parents. I quote on page 372. And it was like a confirmation of their new dreams and good intentions when at the end of their ride, their daughter stood up first and stretched her young body. Now, out of context, this quote is kind of weird, but if you read through the actual story, this is talking about after Gregor passes away and the Samsa family feels like they've been freed of all of these problems that were plaguing their house. Greta Samsa is standing up, looking with a brighter complexion than before, shows how much that she actually changed throughout the book. Now, apart from a metamorphosis, there are also other themes that I want to discuss. The second theme I'd like to talk about is the theme of the unexpected events of life. Life is very unexpected, and that is shown drastically in this short story. We have Gregor Samsa waking up one day as a giant bug. Who expects that to happen in their life? I'll tell you, no one expects that. So, this story kind of takes an interesting look as to what can happen in life, where from one day everything is going well, you're going to your job, going to your class, seeing your wife, seeing your family, to the next day waking up as an arthropod, trying to function with your little legs waving about, acting like they were your arms. This was a pretty crazy thing in the book. And this could be attributed to Franz Kafka studying psychology at some point. And he kind of does take a look at the mind of a human being. And out comes Gregor. The final theme that I'd like to talk about is the loss of sympathy. Now, this short story starts off with Gregor Samsa being hailed and respected by his family, especially his little sister Greta. Greta Samsa looks up to her older brother because her older brother is the reason that she could go to school, she could practice the violin, she could do all of these things, and then her parents don't have to worry about anything except cooking food and cleaning the house. When Gregor disappears, their family, like I said, their family dynamic ends up shifting because instead of it being focused on Gregor as the provider, they get focused on Gregor being a giant bug, and they have to take care of this giant bug. So now, their sympathy ends up drawing extremely thin throughout the book. It just draws on getting thinner and thinner each and every day that they have to live with this gigantic cockroach in the bedroom of the man that they once respected. The biggest evidence for the loss of sympathy is once again Greta Samsa. Greta Samsa, who once respected Gregor to the highest degree, ends up wanting this gigantic bug to be dead, just so that her and her family don't have to worry about anything else. And Gregor does feel this in the book, and what ends up happening, and once again I'm going to quote from the story itself on page 370, he was just conscious of the beginning of dawn outside his window. Then his head sank down completely, involuntarily, and his last breath issued faintly from his nostrils. Now, this comes on after what what Kafka describes as his conviction that he must disappear was, if possible, even stronger than his sister's. Gregor felt the burden he was causing his family, and he felt it in his sister that she does not care about him anymore. And that's what actually causes Gregor's demise. And on that note, after talking about those three themes, I'd like to conclude by saying thank you for listening to me discuss this, and I highly recommend checking out this short story. And I really wish we did have more time to discuss, because even though it's only a couple of pages long, it's a very, very riveting story and kind of trippy because it takes you through the life of a giant bug. So, thank you once again.